Hello everyone, myself Ranjit Kesi, working as an assistant professor at Department of CSE, MIT Mysore. So I will be engaging you a session on UNIX programming, which is a sixth subject of your fifth semester. So where exactly in this particular session onwards, we'll be starting with the module number 3, that is the discussion about general file APIs and knowing about the UNIX environment and learning about this particular process control. So basically, to begin with this particular discussion, I would like to give you a glimpse on what exactly this particular APIs is all about. So for example, any user, if he wants to interact with a machine, at that instance, he needs some kind of an interface for whether it is an accessing a file, whether it is a writing a file, whether it is an reading a file, whatever the operation it may be. For that particular operations, he requires some kind of an interface. So that is what the interface with the help of which we have been learning in this particular session, that is an application program interface, where exactly you will get to know about the different ways in which you can able to interact with the system resources. So in this particular session, we will take up the job of discussing about the different file APIs meant for different file types. So to begin with this particular topic, I would just like to brief you on the different types of files that has been available in a UNIX environment. That is, we have been pretty aware of there is 6 different types of file types, named it as a regular file, a directory file, a FIFO, and character device files, a block device file, and a symbolic link file. So for all these particular 6 different file types, there is a particular or dedicated APIs meant for interfacing or that particular file basically. So if you really want to access, if you really want to perform any operation on these set of different file types, you require a dedicated application, a program interface with the help of which you can able to directly interact with that same. So in this particular session, you will learn about different APIs meant for the general file APIs. So here in this particular general file APIs, so for interacting with the general file type, there are a lot of different ways in which you can able to interact. There is a lot of different interfaces meant for this particular general file type. So named it as there is an interface called open, there is an interface called read, there is an interface called write, there is an interface called stat and fstat meant for the particular usage. I will be giving the details. And there is an interface called Chmod, and there is an interface called CHOWN, interface called UTime, and there is an interface called link, unlink, and lastly umask. So all these particular different APIs meant for interfacing with an general file type. So basically, so these are the not just these, there are plenty of more particular APIs meant for this particular general file type. So these are considered to be most frequently used APIs on this particular general file type. So coming to the very first API, this is open is an API with the help of which you can able to interface, or whenever you need to access any particular file existing in your system, at that instance, this is the particular API that is been meant for building a connection between a process and then a file. So with the help of which, at any point of time, any user wants to access an existing file in a file system, at that instance, you need to make use of a particular API called open. So open is an API with the help of which you can able to build a connection between a process and then a file. Then the next one is an read API. So this read is an API which has been meant for, so once your requirement is to access some information from an existing file. At that instance, how exactly you will need to make use is, first and foremost, you need to build a connection between a process and then file. The next thing is you need to read some information. For the same particular operation, this is an API, that is an read is an API with the help of which you can able to read some information from an existing file. And similarly, write is an API which has been meant for writing the information for the set file. And stat and then fstat. So these are the two different APIs meant for querying file attributes. So suppose if you want to know the different attributes for that particular any existing file, at that instance you can make use of these two different APIs called stat and then fstat. So with the help of which you can able to get to know the different attributes associated with that particular set file. And Chmod. So this is another particular API with the help of which you can able to change the attributes. So with the help of which you can able to modify the attributes, you can make use of this particular Chmod. Then Chon. So changing of an ownership. So if you really want to change the ownership of a file, you can able to make use of this particular API called Chon. Then the utime. So this is an API which will actually alter the two different attributes of a file, say call it as an the access time or last modification time of any particular file. And other one is a link and unlink. So link is an API with the help of which you can able to generate a link for any existing file. So with the help which will actually facilitate two different links for accessing the same common resource. And unlink. Unlink is an API with the help of which you can able to remove or delete any existing link for a given particular file. So that is what the use of this particular unlink. And umask. So umask is another particular API which has been used to mask some of the attributes at the time of a file creation. So you will learn more on this. So these are the most frequently used APIs on this particular general file APIs. Not just this, you will learn on the file lock mechanism in the further session same time. So for this particular session, I will limit myself for the discussion with this particular the open API. Well, so coming back to this particular, the very first API meant for a general file type is an open. So open is an API with the help of which you can able to build a connection between a process and then a file. I'll just represent it as something like this. So just read this particular P stands for the process and F stands for the file. So in any particular case, if your particular user interest is to particular access a file and to modify the file or to delete some particular information in the file or duplicate a file, at that instance, before doing all these particular different operations, it must create a connection between a process and then the file. So this is the connection that has been established with the help of an API called an open. So open is an API with the help of which a connection between a process and then a file has been established. And so after this particular connection has been established, you can perform whether it is reading the information from a file or writing the information to a file or duplicating a file or creating a link or deleting a link. So all this particular mechanism or operations required by an user can be performed accordingly. So that is what this particular the main theme of this particular open API. So as I mentioned earlier, this open is an API with the help of which a connection between a process and any existing file in your file system can be created. Apart from this, the other particular main usage of this particular open API is, suppose if the file set by this particular open API is not been present in your file system. For example, if you are trying to access some particular file which is not been present in a file system, at that instance, this open API will also work, which will actually facilitates of creating a brand new file. So that is what the other particular usage of this particular open API, where exactly if you want to access some particular file which has not been also present, you can able to perform creation of the particular file, of creation of that particular brand new file with the help of an open API. We'll learn more on this particular, what is a different mode in which we can able to access a file and to perform modifier flags, all these things. So that is what the main theme of this particular usage of any particular open API. Apart from this, so if any particular file is being created and been stored in your system, at that instance, if any particular process wants to access a particular file, it can be get done through the API, help of this particular API called Open API, which will create a connection between process and then a file, followed by which it will return a file descriptor for the particular process. So what exactly this particular file descriptor is nothing but it is actually a reference towards an open file. So instead of specifying the same file name every now and then for the different operations on the same particular file, this particular file descriptor will itself act as the pointer for the particular open file. So the return value of a file open function is nothing but an integer value, what that is called as an file descriptor. Now we will know what is the prototype of an open function and how exactly this particular open API can be used in a different consequences. Well, coming back to this, so to know about the prototype function prototype of an API called open, so this is what exactly a common function prototype look like for this open API. That is, this particular function called open has three different function arguments. That is the path name as the very first argument, the second one is the access mode, the third one is the permission. So any particular open API, it requires three different function arguments. So in this particular function argument, the third one is the optional one, where exactly that will be considered only when there is an appropriate file control flag that has been used in this particular, the second function argument. So coming to this API, where exactly the very first argument is all about the path name. So for example, if any particular process wants to access some existing file, at that instance, the very first argument should be the file path name for which this particular function called the open should actually establish connection with the process. So this particular path name is all about the path name of an existing file. So this particular path name can be referred as an absolute path name or else an relative path name. Either of this is been considered as a very first argument, which will point to the existing or appropriate file in your file system. And the second one, that is an access mode. So this actually talks about the way in which you are trying to build a connection with the process and then the file. Whether this particular connection has been meant for reading operation, whether this particular connection has been meant for writing operation, whether it has been for both read and write operations. So here we have been got three different access modes, named it as an so this is the three different access modes that you can pass for this particular second argument of an open API. So where exactly if you specify the second argument as an read only, it means to say that the established connection between this particular process and then set file is been meant for reading the information from the particular set file. Suppose if you mention if the second argument as an write only, at that instance it has been just meant for writing some set of information for the set particular file in the very first argument. Where in case of if we really want to perform both read and then write operation, at that instance you can specify the second argument as something like this, that is an read write, which stands for performing both read and then write operation on the set particular file. So these are the three different access modes in which this particular connection will be determine the nature of the particular interaction between the process with the particular file. So not just these three different access modes, we have got many other particular modifier flags with the help of which you can able to control the way in which this particular 3 different access modes do work. So knowing the best, here we have got many other particular access modifier flags which can be used bitwise ORing with the help of this particular access mode, which you can able to have more control on this particular 3 different access modes. So let me just mention that that different access modifier flags. Well, so these are the 6 different modifier flags which can be accessed along with these 3 different access mode. So this particular access mode can have a more control with the help of this particular 6 different modifier flags which can be used bitwise ORing with respect to this access modes. So coming to this very first modifier flag, that is an O append. Suppose if you have been used a particular file, if your intention is to access a particular file, to build a connection with that particular file and to perform some write operation in it. So you want to write some more information for the particular file. At that instance, you will definitely prefer this particular write only or else an read and write access mode. So here in this case, what exactly it tries to perform is, if you just don't mention this particular modifier flag called O append, at that instance, any newly written information or newly fed information may be placed in anywhere in the particular the stream of the particular size of the file, the contents of a file. So it may begin in the beginning locations, or in any other particular different end of file, or any other particular based upon the cursor where exactly it has been placed. So here, if you really want to have more control on the particular writing information for the particular file, at that instance, and your objective is to append the newly typed information, you can make use of this particular modifier flag called O append for the read and write or else an write only access mode. So this particular O append as giving the control on this particular the way in which the information has been fed to the particular file, that is an existing file. So that is what this usage of this particular O append, that stands for appending the newly typed information to the end of that particular file of the contents of that file. Next one is an O create. For example, you have been in this particular open API, you have been specified a file that is not present in a file system. Fine. At that instance, you are trying to build a connection with a file which is not present in a file system. At that instance, what exactly things will go is, if the file is not being present in a file system, the open function will actually fail to perform. That is, the open function will fail to perform and it will return the failure status of that particular status. So in avoidance of this particular consequences, if you really want, if a set file is not been present in a file system, if you really want to create it, you can go with this particular modifier flag called O create, with help of which, if the set file is not present in a file system, it tries to create on behalf of your request. That is what this meaning of this particular O create modifier flag stands for. So this you can use with any of these 3 different access modes. Then O execute. So this is another particular modifier flag which should always be used with the O create. So O execute can never be used and individually, it can be associated with another particular modifier flag called O create. That is, and once again the bitwise ORing with the any other particular modifier flag, that is O create. So here in this particular case, what exactly this particular O execute will perform is, if the file is not being present and if it is trying to create a particular file, at that instance, so what actually it tries to perform is, if the set file is already been present and still you have been used an access mode called O create, at that instance it will suppress the working of this particular ocreate. That is, it will tries to execute the operation of this particular ocreate, because the set file is already been present in a file system and need not worry about the creating of that same particular file with the help of an ocreate. At that instance, this oexecl will actually tries to suppress the working of ocreate modifier flag. And coming to this next one, the otrunc. So this particular otrunc, what actually tries to perform is, see, if you have a particular file with some amount of finite bytes of information, at that instance you are trying to access the particular file in terms of an write operation. You are trying to write some more information for the given existing file. At that instance, and your objective is to delete all the existing information in the set file. At that instance, you can make use of this particular access modifier flag called otrunc, with the help of which, when you have been access this particular file with the help of an that is an read or the write or read and write access mode, at that instance this particular modifier flag will tries to help with the truncating of all the data that is present in a file already. So it will ensure that any newly typed information will only be the content placed in your file, set file. So that is the reason of this particular modifier flag called otrunc, which will ensure truncation of the existing data in a set file. So that is what this particular usage of this particular otrunc modifier flag. And coming to this, the very first 4 modifier flags can be used with any regular file types. These particular 4 different modifier flags can be used with any particular different regular file types, where exactly one non-block can only be used with the FIFO file. That is it can be used with the FIFO file. And the last modifier flag can be used with the terminal device file. Mean to say, you can never use oopen, ocreate, oexecl, otrunc with a directory file API, or with accessing a directory file, or else accessing a FIFO file, or else a symbolic link file, or anything like that. So these 4 different modifier flags can only be used along with the regular file types, where exactly the one non-block can be used with an FIFO file type, and the last one, the no CTTY can be used only with the terminal device file. So coming to this particular O non-block. So this, if you have been accessing some particular FIFO file, at that instance, if you want this particular non-blocking mode of execution. So what actually this particular non-blocking mode of execution is, suppose if you are really trying to read an empty file, at that instance, since there is no data available in the FIFO file, that is a pipe file, it will enter into the blocking mode of execution. That is, the reason is it will wait until unless some data has been written into that particular pipe file. So until unless some new information has been typed to that particular pipe file, it will enter into a blocking mode of execution. Similarly, if you are trying to write some information to a filled pipe, that is, if the pipe size has been filled, and if you are really trying to write some more information to the particular pipe file, at that instance, obviously there is no free space available in the pipe file. At that instance, any newly typed information will be in a blocking mode of execution. So at that instance, without entering to that particular blocking mode of execution, what exactly we being a user expect is, it should return the current status for that particular operation, and the control should return back to the user. At that instance, we make use of this particular one non-block. So if you have been made use of this particular modifier flag, any particular using of this particular open API will never get into the phase of blocking mode of execution, and hence it avoids, that is any reading the data from an empty file or writing the data to a filled file. At that instance, it tries to save the time because of getting entered into the blocking mechanism of that particular process. And last one, that is a no CTTY, that is no control terminal device. So suppose, well, here we have gotten a small example to know how exactly any general open API will look like when it's been using for some different operation on a existing particular file. So here in this particular example, what we are trying to do is we are trying to access a file called a textbook, and you can observe the path name has been given over here, and the very first argument for any open API is an path name of a file that needs to be accessed. And hence, in the very first argument, we have been specifying the path name for the file called textbook. Then the second argument, this particular second argument is all about the access mode, which actually specifies the mode in which the file should be accessed. So in this particular second argument, you can make use of that 6 different modifier flags based upon the need of that particular usage. So what exactly we are trying to do is, this particular file called textbook has been accessed in the mode of an read and write. It has been accessed in the mode of read and write, and suppose if the newly typed information needs to be appended to the end of file, to ensure that we have been making use of this particular modifier flag called OAppend. So that is the bitwise ignoring with respect to the access mode called OReadWrite, and that is an OAppend. So that is how you can able to make use of these 6 different modifier flags based upon the need with respect to accessing of any particular file. And observe there, the third argument, which has been given as 0, mean to say that we are not specifying any particular value for that third argument, that is a mode, that is a permission, and hence we are not so bothered about this particular third argument. Reason is, this third argument called permission should only be given only if the second argument is been given with a modifier flag called OCreate. For example, if you are trying to create any particular new file, at that instance you will definitely give this particular user permission, isn't it? For the particular permission, that is what is the user permission for a user, for a group and others. Whether you have been allowing a read and write and execute operation for a user or for a group or for others. So that is being determined with the help of this particular the third argument. So this third argument will be used only if the modifier flag called OCreate has been used in the second argument. If not the case, it is sufficient to specify the third argument as an 0. So that is what this particular case, in the small example, in the previous example, we learned about how exactly any open API will look like. And meantime, supposed to explain that the return value of this particular open function is nothing but an integer value, that is a file descriptor, which can be used as a value to point to the same particular file in future for the performing of an read operation or a write operation on a same particular file. Coming to the last argument for this particular open API is the permission. So this particular permission is nothing but the value that needs to be passed for this newly creating file. That is, if you have been made use of an modifier flag called OCreate with the help of a second argument of this open API, at that instance you need to specify the permissions for user, group and others. So to determine that, we make use of this particular third argument called the permission. Yes, the thing is, we call this the value for this permission, we call it as an octal integer literal, where exactly the values look something like this: 0764, where exactly this is for a user and this is for a group and this is for others. So this octal integer literal is being used for determining or to specifying the permissions for a user, a group and for others. So what actually this particular permission is nothing but if the value specified is 7, which means to say that that particular user is been given with read, write as well as execute permission for that particular user. For example, in here in this small example, if the group value has been given it as 6, it is understood that the group is been permitted for read and write operation only and not the execute. Where in case of this particular others, mean to say the others are been limited only for the reading of the information of that particular file. So that is how you can able to give the user permissions for any newly created file with the help of an oCreate flag used in this particular Open API, the second argument. So that is how you can able to make use of this particular Open API for the sake of creating a connection between a process and then file. At the last, what exactly the thing needs to be remembered is this Open API, the very first argument, it is capable towards taking it as an file path name or absolute path name or also an relative path name. Suppose if you specify the very first argument as any symbolic link file, if the past file is not a regular file and if it is a symbolic link file, at that instant what actually this particular Open API will actually perform. So in this particular case, this particular symbolic link file will be search for its original file, and that particular original file will be accessed with the help of an Open API. That means to say, if a symbolic link file is been passed for this particular Open API, it will be dereferenced to its original file, and the original file will be accessed for the particular operation. So the linked file will not be used for this particular operation. That is what the gist of this particular Open API. So this is all about the very major API meant for this accessing of any general file types. So before performing any of different operations, say call it as an read operation, call it as an write operation, call it as an linking a file, or whatever the particular operation it is, first and foremost you need to create a connection between the process and then the file. So that is being done with the help of an API called Open API, which can capable of taking 3 different arguments. The very first one is the file name or the file path name. The second is an access mode, which actually determines in which particular mode the file needs to be accessed, and the last one is an permission that is been used only when the second argument is been given with an oCreate access modifier flag. Clear? Well, the next API that will be discussed here is the create. So create is another particular small API. So this create, close is another particular small APIs that has been meant for general file APIs once again. So this particular create is an API with the help of which a new brand file can be created. So the same functionality can also be witnessed with the help of an Open API, with the help of an oCreate. If not the case, if you really want to create the particular file before its access, at that instance you can go ahead with the particular the Open API called a create API, with the help of which you can able to create the said file. The function prototype for this particular create API is something like this. Yes. Coming to this particular this particular create API, so the function prototype for this create API is something like this. That is, it is capable for taking 2 different arguments. The very first one is the file path name or the location where exactly the file needs to be stored, and the second one is the mode. This mode is as similar to the mode permission that has been discussed in the previous API, that is an Open API. That is, it takes an octal, integer, literal, which will stands for giving suitable permissions for a user, group and others. So this particular create API will specify the path name followed by the mode, and it will actually create the particular file, and it will return the status as the success status. If not the case, it will return the failure status. That failure status is nothing but the -1. if the return value is the negative integer, it means to say that the particular function has been failed to perform. So you may think about what is the different cases in which this particular file, this particular API may fail to work. For example, in what are the different consequences this create API can fail for its performance. So one common explanation is if the set file path name is already been present in your file system. If a set file name is already been present in a file system, you cannot actually, this particular create function cannot work, and once again you can expect a failure status. That is, if the past file name is said to be the existing file name, once again this particular create API will actually fail to perform. Then the other particular consequences is if this particular mode value is not been appropriate, once again you can expect an failure of this particular execution. And if this particular number of files present in a file system is already been exceeded the maximum limit, even at that consequence you can expect the failure of this particular execution of a function called create. So these are the different consequences in which you can expect the failure of this particular create API. In all other particular cases, the return value is the positive integer that stands for this particular create API is successfully created a set file with the appropriate mode that is been specified. Now you can observe the two different header files that has been used over here, that is sysbar types.h and unistd.h. So this particular sysbar types.h has the different values of this mode that has been present, and hence whenever you make use of this particular API called create, you need to make use of this particular header file. And once again unistd.h, reason is the other particular this particular function has been defined in it, and hence you need to make use of this particular two different header files whenever this particular function has been used in your program for a same particular operation. Yes. Coming to this particular, the next API for the discussion is the read API. So read is an API with the help of which you can able to read some information from any existing file. So this is the particular API which has been used to fetch any sort of information from any existing file. So this particular API, if at all if you really want to access some information from an existing file, you cannot directly go with this particular API called read. First and foremost, you need to make use of an open, with the help of which the connection between the process and then file is being established. Okay, so that means to say before making use of this particular read API, you are supposed to make use of an open API for the sake of creating a connection between the process and then the file. Next, you can go with this particular read API, which has been meant for reading the information from an set file, from an open file. Okay, so here in this particular case, this read API can take three different arguments. The very first one is the file descriptor, the integer value called file descriptor. The second is an pointer for the buffer. The next one is the size. So here in this case, the very first argument will specify the file descriptor, that is then the file pointer from which particular file you are trying to access the information. Okay, it is very clear, that is it specifies the destination file from which you are trying to read some information. So this will nothing but the file descriptor. The file descriptors are nothing but the return value of an open function. So any process accessing a file with the help of an open function, at that instance the return value is itself file descriptor. That particular file descriptor is been used to refer to that particular open file. So instead of specifying the particular path name once every time, something like this, we have make use of this particular file descriptors and integer value that corresponds to a particular open file. The next one is the pointer for the buffer, where exactly this is nothing but any data that has been read from this particular file will be stored momentarily in this particular temporary buffer, and this particular data will be given back to the user, that is a process. That is how the things will work. And the last argument is the size. So this actually specifies what is the maximum amount of data that is supposed to be read from that particular file. So for example, if you are interested for reading the data of 10 bytes or 500 bytes of information from the existing file, you can specify in that particular third argument, which will actually specify the size of the data that's supposed to be read from that particular file. And this is the read is an this particular return value is nothing but once this particular function called read has been successfully executed, the return value corresponds to the maximum amount of a data that has been read from that particular set file, is what exactly the interpretation of this particular read API is all about. That is, the return values corresponds to the amount of data that has been read from the opened file. For example, consider this in some particular consequence where the file itself has a 10 bytes of an information, and you had specified the maximum limit as to read the data as 50 bytes. At that instance, all 50 bytes is not been first of all present in a file. At that instance, it will return the value called 10. The reason is that is the size of the information that has been read from the opened file. So, excuse. So in this particular case, what are the different ways in which this particular read API can fail for its execution is, the very one common factor is if this given file descriptor is an inappropriate. Suppose if the file descriptor value is itself inappropriate, you can expect the failure of execution for the read API. And if any particular arguments has been mismatched, that is then it is inappropriately placed, even at that consequences, you can expect the failure of execution for this particular read API. And coming back to this, we have one more API called write. So the write API, the function prototype for write API is very same. That is, instead of an read, we will have a function name called as an write. Even this particular write function prototype will have a same 3 different arguments. The very first one is an file descriptor itself. The second is an the buffer, which stands for the temporary buffer, that is the any newly typed information will be stored to the buffer and followed by it will be placed to the appropriate file. The next is the size, that defines the maximum amount of information that's supposed to be written to the particular file. So here in this particular case, the very first argument specifies the destination file to which you are trying to perform the data. Okay. Even in this particular case, before executing this write API, you need to make use of this particular open API, because the connection between a process and then file has to be established, and that return value of that particular open API is nothing but a file descriptor, and that particular file descriptor will be used for pointing to the said file. And we will specify any newly typed information will be put into that particular buffer, and that information will be stored to the set file. And the third argument will specify the size of data that is trying to be written into that particular file. And the return value of this particular write API will specify the amount of an successfully written data or information for the set file. So that is all about this particular using of this particular API called read and then write API for its appropriate usage. So in this particular session, we have been done with discussing common 4 APIs for a general file type. The one that is an very first one is an open API. Then we learnt about this particular create API. Then we learnt on this particular read and then the write API. So in the further sessions, we'll discuss more on the other particular APIs meant for the interpretation or interfacing with a general file types. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.